Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and more specifically, welcome to the Nencyclopedia, where today we will be examining one of the most underrated but undoubtedly phenomenal Nen users in the series, being Morel Makanasi. And yes, Morel does indeed have a last name. In fact, lots of Hunter x Hunter characters have last names, even Hisoka. His name is Hisoka Morel, which yes, is underwhelming and meaningless, but hey, there it is. But back to Mr. Morel. When it comes to hunters, he is probably one of the finest we've ever seen, which does include members of the Zodiacs, primarily because I guess we haven't really seen much of them, but Morel is very much the embodiment of what it means to be a hunter, which in turn makes him the very model of a modern major Nen user. And if you, dear viewer, wish to sign up for Morel's 6-week intensive Nen training program, then all you need to do is register your interest by subscribing to the New World Review, which has the added benefit of uploading regular Hunter x Hunter content straight into your YouTube feed. But as for what you will become though, look, Morel is not an easy being to live up to. I've explored this idea on a couple of occasions in previous Nencyclopedia entries, but there is a certain physical and mental standard that one must reach in order to become a potent vessel of aura control. And whilst Morel certainly does not represent the pinnacle of either in the series, he is indeed the king of consistency across the board. In terms of physicality, he has pushed the limitations of the human body to its extremes, resulting in incredible strength, speed, and surprisingly amazing reflexes, which were on full display during Morel's skirmish with Cheetu, as Morel quite quickly became accustomed to Cheetu's absurd speed. But all of which would be next to useless without an equally as sharp mind to make use of these physical abilities. And in that sense, I would not place Morel on the same sort of intellectual playing field as say Jing or Pariston, but in terms of combat it's very hard to pinpoint a better thinker and on-the-fly strategist. But most importantly of all, Morel does his best to remain grounded at all times. In fact, he is acutely aware that even with all of these incredibly strong features, he could be defeated and potentially even killed at a moment's notice by a significantly less experienced adversary simply due to underestimating them and being surprised by a weird Nen ability. And that thought process is quite a rarity actually. Most Nen users of Morel's caliber carry some degree of arrogance, or at the very least far too much confidence with them into battle. Whereas the name of Morel's game is versatility. He is a man experienced enough to know that anything is possible in this world of aura control, and his abilities reflect a desire to respond to quite literally anything that gets thrown his way. Before launching into that though, Morel is one of the very rare characters in the series who provides us with an accurate aura metric, as according to Knuckle, one of Morel's students, he possesses an aura pool consisting of roughly 70,000 units. What does units mean? Well, unfortunately it's a Knuckle exclusive measurement, but it is consistent, and this can be directly compared to Mr. Gon, who Knuckle also measured. In his peak condition prior to the palace invasion, Gon was capable of generating 21,500 units of aura, thus giving Morel more than 3 times the access to aura that an already quite terrifying Gon had. And the only thing that really empirically eclipses Morel's aura quantity is that of the Royal Guard, the Ant-King Meruem, and obviously Isaac Netero. Although when trying to classify them, it's usually easier just to state that their aura is effectively infinite because their pools are just that ridiculously large. But all of that really is to say that Morel's aura reserves are envious to say the least, and quite possibly his greatest individual asset at most. As for someone who strives to be prepared for anything and everything, a lot of leeway is going to be essential in order to ensure that Morel doesn't lock himself into a dead end of aura dedication. Now moving on to Morel's actual Nen affinity, he happens to be a natural manipulator, which I think is actually quite initially counterproductive to Morel's mission with Nen use. I mean, manipulation is, admittedly, far more versatile than most people give it credit for, and that's because when we think of this affinity, the mind always wanders to certain characters like Ilimi Zoldyck or perhaps even Shalnark of House No Last Name, both of whom are the poster children for pure manipulation. In fact, at no stage are any of their abilities even credited with anything else, despite my insistence that emission would be necessary in a couple of cases. But even if it was, it would be a minimal splash use of emission, and Morel is very much the exact opposite of this. When it comes to Nen, Morel invests his aura equally into 3 differing affinities, being manipulation, emission, and transmutation, which is a very bizarre combination and extraordinarily difficult to pull off. But as a result, Morel becomes a troublesome opponent and nigh on impossible to overcome. Which leads us quite nicely into Morel's crowning Nen ability, which is named Deep Purple. And the basic gist of this is that Morel is able to use his incredible quantity of aura to create these smoke-based constructs, which can take the form of items such as ropes, rafts, grass, like literally name any item, any at all, and Morel will be able to create it out of smoke. But in addition to that, he can also create faux Nen beasts, by which I mean constructs with the illusion of life that Morel then goes on to manipulate. And this latter feature is probably what most fans think of when it comes to Morel, specifically his smoke troopers. However, there is a pretty extraordinary degree of confusion regarding how they are brought into being, which, to get into, let's start with the smoke itself, because that presents a pretty big problem. Because this smoke is no smoke at all, it's actually transmuted aura, which is where a lot of the confusion surrounding Deep Purple stems from. The primary issue being that Morel, as stated earlier, is a natural manipulator, manipulator, which, if we examine the Nen ring, is generally incompatible with transmutation due to them being in the exact opposite positions. So usually it would be incredibly unwise for a manipulator to try and dip into transmutation because their aura cost per mileage would be absolutely abysmal and destructively inefficient, even for someone with Morel's grand reserves. However, there is a surprisingly simple way around this, which is by adding a restriction on the use of transmutation. And in Morel's case, that would be the gigantic F-off pipe, and in order to activate Deep Purple, or in fact any smoke-based ability, Morel can only transmute aura through this pipe via the process of essentially smoking his own aura. Only with that strict limitation can he use transmutation to an efficient degree. And I would imagine that the size of the pipe also plays greatly into these limitations as well. And if Morel had, say, an even bigger pipe, then the transmutation could be even more potent. However, he went about as big as he reasonably could to keep himself versatile. But I should mention that a great misconception within many Hunter x Hunter fans is that Morel smoke is just regular smoke that he goes on to manipulate, which to be fair does make some straightforward sense with his affinity as a manipulator, but it's just not true. Morel's aura smoke demonstrates too many bizarre qualities that natural smoke is simply not capable of. For example, in his fight against Lael, Morel smoke is able to act as a solid substance and form a series of underwater pipes. And manipulation is just not capable of such a thing. You cannot manipulate something to bend the laws of its established reality. However, what you can do is transmute an entirely new substance that mimics smoke whilst also providing other beneficial features. Like how Hisoka's bungee gum contains the properties of both rubber and gum, there I said it, and it is neither substance yet both at the same time, all thanks to the power of transmutation. The best I could really see one doing is coming up with an explanation that Morel uses real smoke and then invokes enhancement on the smoke to solidify and tighten the particles or whatever, which you know isn't the most outrageous thing I've ever seen or heard in Hunter x Hunter. However, it is a much more complicated solution to a very simple Nen problem. And in the end, it doesn't matter anyway, because we do have confirmation when we see Morel's process of constructing a smoke trooper. So firstly, what happens is Morel emits a ball of aura. Very standard emission, almost exactly what someone like Razor would do, except this ball is not meant to serve an offensive purpose. You could think of it more like a computer chip or some other programming device, but this aura nucleus is what Morel issues commands to, which are then performed by the smoke figure formed around it. Which, speaking of, step 2 here has Morel quite blatantly stating, then envelop it with smoke aura. And I really don't know how much clearer we can get here. Here Morel is stating that his aura and the smoke are one in the same thing, so a transmuted substance, there is no other option. Which then goes on to become the shape of whatever Morel wants to create. And only then does Morel's primary affinity of manipulation come into play, which is then used to issue commands to the aura nucleus within. It really is quite a genius level use of Nen in my opinion, because manipulators and conjurers tend to get quite screwed over in the world of Hunter x Hunter due to being right next to the unusable specialization affinity, which is why a lot of conjurers and manipulators will stick to more pure based applications because of the limited splash potential. But Morel just took full advantage of the rules of Nen, deciding to take on a cumbersome but workable restriction in order to have access to an almost completely unique skill set. There are further limitations, though specifically on Deep Purple, and when it comes to the smoke troopers, Morel has a maximum capacity of crafting 216 of them, which yes is a hell of a lot, but in this case he is sacrificing quality for quantity, and it's really only useful when he requires a show of overwhelming force or for quick efficient scouting purposes. Now alternatively, Morel can compress this number down to 50 troopers, which are capable of performing more complex commands, and they can even take on more realistic forms. In fact, to the untrained eye and even to the trained Nen user, they can pass for living things, because at this point even an experienced Nen user's N cannot tell them apart from regular humans. But one problem that should also be mentioned is that once Morel has created smoke troops, or indeed smoke anything, his aura is then committed to that construct, and in order to retrieve the aura spent, he needs to dispel them, which can leave Morel quite compromised in situations where Deep Purple is heavily utilized. Although once again this usually plays into Morel's great advantage of aura reserves. He can very much spend exorbitant amounts and still have enough left to defend himself quite effectively. Against, well, most opponents anyway, maybe not so much say a member of the Royal Guard. Which brings us to the second and indeed final of Morel's named abilities actually, which is known as Smoky Jail, which at first glance just appears like another unique use of Deep Purple, but the important technical difference is that this ability does not utilize emission. It's just manipulation and transmutation coming together to form an unbreakable barrier of smoke thing to encase someone or something in. Theoretically unbreakable anyway, because as it turns out, due to transmuted smoke still inherently possessing many of the core qualities of smoke, particle-sized objects can still pass through the barrier. barrier, which is very awkward since during the palace invasion, Morel was faced with the one opponent who could do exactly that. It's still a ridiculously powerful ability though, however it may come with at least one restriction, being that Morel must also encase himself in the Smoky jail, and it also likely requires a truly massive investment of aura to keep up due to there being nothing but speculatory limitations, because it's just way too powerful to be used in a casual manner. And that's very much Morel, quite possibly one of the most well-balanced Nen users in Hunter x Hunter. Someone whose natural affinity of Nen did not necessarily agree with their path forward in life, and so someone who managed to use their mind like no other. Because in theory, really, Morel is nothing all that special. We've seen stronger characters, we've seen smarter characters, and we've certainly seen more naturally talented characters. But Morel makes his mark on this world simply through hard work and merit. And really, I think a lack of that Gon and Killua style talent may actually work very much to Morel's advantage, because it has forced him to think very creatively about his various restrictions in life, resulting in one of the most captivating Nen users in the entire series. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Hunt Hunter content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular Hunt Hunter glory delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.